Hey everyone, Captain Sean here today with a special review for a lesser known but still well-loved animated version of the classic fairy tale, The Little Mermaid, a version that was actually a Japanese anime movie created by the company Toei back in 1975. 14 years before the more famous Disney version was made. And despite the Disney film being superior in many respects, as time has gone by, many have started to recognize the anime version of this story as superior to the Disney film in other respects. Now, let's just be completely honest up front. The Disney version easily has the better detailed animation, the more memorable music, the superior acting, and much faster pacing with more action and adventure. But what many people are starting to recognize about the anime version is that it has the better story. For one, it's much closer to the original fairy tale by Hans Christian Andersen. It's much more darker, and there's actually a strong moral in this tale. Now, before we move any further, it should be noted this isn't exactly a movie for young children. Despite it looking like a simple G-rated kids animated movie on the surface, the thing is, it's a Japanese G-rated kids animated movie, and as many hardcore anime fans know, many G-rated animated movies for kids in Japan are actually more like PG-13 movies in America. Now, there is not any bad language, innuendos, or any scenes featuring the characters doing inappropriate, dirty, or nasty things. But there is some violence, and there's also imagery you would see in, let's just say, old European paintings. But since this is an old European-based fairy tale, it does seem acceptable here. And so, let's move on with this review. The story starts out in the real world with a narrator explicitly explaining how this is very much a fairy tale written by a real-life author. So any darkness in this tale is already lightened up a little bit by reminding viewers this is definitely a fantasy and these are not real people. The story then really begins with a little mermaid, Marina, swimming around in the ocean with her dolphin friend Fritz. They enjoy their life under the sea, but they are afraid of a dreaded sea witch who creates the storms of the sea. Marina wants to go explore the surface world, but since she's still a young teenager, her father, who is a widower, and her grandmother forbid it. Now the next several parts are what you expect. Marina goes to the surface, falls in love with a prince that she watches from afar, and then rescues the prince from a sinking ship, and despite having no conversation with him and knowing very little about him, Marina decides that she'll do anything it takes to be with this prince forever. Now one important different plot point here is Marina leaves the prince before he completely wakes up, and she sees that from afar someone else is about to take him to safety. So because Marina will do anything it takes to be with the prince, she goes to the dreaded sea witch for a magical spell that will turn her into a human. The sea witch, who has a pretty creepy design, agrees to help her for the cost of her voice. But it's more complicated than just that. The sea witch tells her that if she takes the potion, she will never become a mermaid again, and if the prince marries someone else, she'll die, and her body will become nothing but sea foam. Now, Marina does agree, but instead of the transformation happening immediately, she's given a potion and is given time to decide if she should do this. And despite this movie having a much slower pace than the Disney tale, this slower pace actually works to the movie's advantage here. Marina is given time to really be quiet for a bit and think through her decision. We see her softly saying goodbye to her friends and her family while they sleep, knowing she'll never see them again. And then we see her take the potion and experience pain as the slow transformation happens. Now, the next bunch of scenes are what you would expect. The prince finds Marina, she adjusts to human life in a palace while being a mute, and she sparks up a nice friendship with the prince. However, one of the differences in this version of the story is, after many weeks go by, the prince remembers someone saving him a while back, and since Marina reminds him of who he thinks rescued him, he decides that he wants to marry Marina. But then the prince meets another princess who actually was the person that found the prince on the beach after Marina saved him and then left. And she isn't the sea witch in disguise, she's just another nice princess. So the prince just dumps Marina and decides to marry this other princess. And yeah, this might make the prince seem like a jerk, but this is not the prince's story. It's Marina's. She gave up everything to be with this guy that she barely knew. And it turns out, he's the kind of guy that would dump her in seconds. And this is where the moral of the story comes in. A moral that is really important for young girls and female teenagers watching. Giving up everything you hold close and dear for just some guy you've known for a short time is a very dangerous thing and can lead to heartbreak and very serious consequences. It's even like an allegory for teenagers laying with and giving themselves completely physically to someone before marriage and while they're still too young. You might think you're going to get something amazing, but in the long run, you'll probably only regret and feel hurt from what you did later on. And again, because of the slower pace of the movie, the story really takes its time to let these feelings and thoughts that Marina is having about this realization sink in. And yes, she completely has not forgotten that the prince marrying someone else means that she will indeed die soon. And after the prince marries the other woman, the movie spends its entire last act with Marina realizing she is about to die. But there's still more drama to be had. Marina's sisters show up and give Marina a magical dagger that if she uses to kill the prince, will allow her to become a mermaid again and live. She could go back to her normal life and act like none of this happened. All she would have to do is just one more terrible action. And the movie takes its time to have a long drawn-out moment where Marina contemplates doing this. But she doesn't, because she has learned now that doing anything wrong that seems quick and easy will have consequences. So she decides to not do this terrible action and simply live with the consequence of her first wrong choice. And it's the final scene of the movie that makes this version of the classic fairy tale easily the most powerful and memorable final scene ever made. Marina stands on the edge of a ship on the ocean during her final moments of life, just quietly thinking. Then the prince appears not far behind Marina, calling out to her, but rather than let him see her body dissolve, she jumps off the ship and falls into the water. Her final moments of life are spent with her body moving through the ocean water, experiencing the one sensation she could have spent many more years doing if she hadn't made the bad choices that she did. But now she won't. And just as her body becomes foam, the prince only now finally remembers it was indeed Marina that was the one that went through the actual action of saving him from the sunken ship. But sadly, realizing this now will do nothing. And so, the story ends. And yeah, if you can't tell, this movie's ending is really dark. And yet, it's what makes this movie's story much better than the Disney movie. Now yeah, there are still things to admire about the Disney version. The Disney Little Mermaid, Ariel, is a very driven character that does work hard to get what she wants. The thing is, she doesn't really learn anything. She wants to go to the surface world and risk everything for some guy she barely knows. However, for Ariel, she actually wins her long shot gamble because it turns out this prince she barely knows actually is a very great guy that likes her, and everything works out in the end. However, in this version, Marina gambles on the long shot outcome of everything working out for her, but she loses. It's almost like the anti-Disney movie. Seriously, way too many classic Disney movies feature a guy and a girl meeting up, and they instantly decide to be together forever. Now, Disney has finally fixed this flaw in their more recent movies, such as Frozen for example, where Princess Anna is told in story that it's dangerous to commit yourself to some guy you've just met. And it's in that Disney movie that we truly see how dangerous that can be. However, unlike in the anime Little Mermaid movie, everything turns out well for Anna because she gets help from her family and friends that she has kept close to her. And that makes you realize another aspect of what makes the anime Little Mermaid so good. It's also a cautionary tragedy about what happens if you don't inform your loved ones of what you're doing. It's kind of like Romeo and Juliet. Some people have called Romeo and Juliet the greatest romantic tragedy of all time. But the thing is, Romeo and Juliet were not smart individuals. They were willing to marry and even die for some person they barely knew. However, if their feuding families were more focused on them, they could have helped prevent what happened in the end. Thus, Romeo and Juliet is a stronger story if you view it as a cautionary tale about what happens if teenagers and the adults in their lives don't spend time together talking about the important facts of life. Because if you don't, some teenagers might do some crazy things that just come to the top of their head. The Little Mermaid anime is very similar. It's a cautionary tragedy of what can happen to a teenager if they don't spend a lot of time thinking their choices through, including talking to their family members for help. Life is dangerous, and sometimes when you're experiencing new emotions in your teenage years, these emotions without proper knowledge and wisdom can drive you to do things that aren't right. So listen to those that have experienced loss and love. Think hard about the long-term consequences to your choices, rather than the short-term or just possible benefits you might get. And be very careful with every new type of experience you're about to jump into. Do everything you can to make sure your story doesn't end like the tale of the Little Mermaid.